Mike Aronoff, Canoe, Kayak, and Paddle Company. When you are in a kayak, the equivalent of a spare tire is having a paddle float and a pump. That allows you to do a paddle float self-rescue. That's what we're going to demonstrate now. Boat over, and there's no one to help him. Capsizes, wet exits, stays downwind of the kayak so that the boat will blow on top of him, not away. Gets his paddle float out, puts his leg in the cockpit to keep control of the kayak and not lose it. Paddle float goes on the end of the paddle and is then inflated. You make sure that he clips it together so that the paddle float can't blow off. Takes a few blows. This paddle float has got 2 chambers, and that's always a good idea to have a little bit of redundancy. He flips the boat back over by flipping the kayak away from him so it takes in less water, and he then puts the paddle blade in the paddle float rigging so that he can use the paddle and the paddle float as an outrigger to support him while he gets back into the boat. So he's going to be in front of the paddle, close to the cockpit, and he puts his ankle over the paddle shaft, pulls himself up and straightens his leg to get on top of the kayak with his head towards the stern. 1 leg's in, 2 legs are in, keeps his weight and his eye on the paddle float so that he doesn't capsize the other way, gets himself situated, feet on the pegs, skirt on. You leave the paddle float inflated and in place until you've got everything else taken care of. What he has to do now in order to get the water out of the kayak is to pump it. His other alternative would be paddle it back to shore full of water. That was a paddle float self-rescue that was dependent upon the swimmer having the strength to pull himself up on top of the kayak using just his arms. A lot of folks need a little help, and for that we use a thing called a sling. Eric's going to rig the sling, and our sling is nothing more than just a piece of the same webbing that we use to tie the kayak on top of our vehicle. So we've got the strap rigged by placing the strap on the outside of the outboard paddle blade. He wraps it around the inside of the paddle shaft between the strap itself and the kayak so that it stays in place. He can now use that as a stirrup, and he puts his foot in the stirrup and that way he can use his leg strength to get back on top of the kayak. So this is very helpful for a lot of people, and it makes a lot of sense to carry a sling. Could be your best friend sometime. So there you have it, paddle float self-rescue with and without a sling. There's a lot of different rescues, and another one that you can use with a paddle float if you have enough underwater comfort is called a re-enter and roll using the paddle float. I'm going to demonstrate that. You're going to see me do the first part, which is fall out of the boat and wet exit. Then I'm going to put my paddle float on the paddle. I'm going to get my body back in the kayak underwater and then use the paddle float to help me roll up from that capsized position into smiling and upright.